Okay, so we're talking about localization careers, and we're going to start out hearing from Winnie Heh, who will talk about visualizing career paths to help both recruiters and employers and employees. Then we'll hear from Elena Brandt, who will talk about standardizing core competencies to make sure that both employers and employees are aligned, both recruiters and those candidates seeking are aligned. I will then go off on a little bit of a tangent, talking specifically about some technology-specific core competencies, and finish up by talking about how we can expand access to these localization career opportunities to others in a way that maybe some of you might be able to participate. But for now, please join me in welcoming Winnie Heh.
Great. How's the volume? Is it too loud? Okay. Is this better? Okay, great. Thank you. I am delighted to be here tonight to share with you some of the work that I have done to bridge what I would call a talent gap in the language industry. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently the career advisor for the Translation, Interpretation, and Localization Management programs at Middlebury Institute of International Studies. I have 30 years of experience in the industry and have worn many different hats, from being a language teacher to working in operations, sales, and marketing, in development of new technology for language access. And so I would like to first share the context with you as to what prompted me to start this work. It goes back to about 10 years ago. In 2008, I was the VP of Global Operations at Language Line Solutions, the world's largest provider of remote interpretation. And for most of my career, I was focusing on interpretation. 2008, the company acquired a translation and localization company based in Oregon, and it came under my management. When I took over the business, one thing that surprised me immediately was, of all the project managers, none had a language background. And I want to be clear about one thing. I do not think you need to have a language background to be successful in the language industry. We have plenty of examples of great colleagues who make great contributions to the industry without a language background. But what surprised me was, the question that just kept coming back to me was, why wouldn't language students compete for these jobs? Because I felt these jobs are perfect for them. But then I was busy with my life, with my work, didn't think too much about it. The second seed was planted in 2012, around this time. I remember I was attending the ATA conference in November. It was a time when I think young professionals were still struggling to deal with the challenging job market after the 2008 recession. And so in one of the morning shows, a young lady who was a French major was featured. And the title of the segment was, "Is the cost of a college education worth it?" And this young lady said she majored in French and her aspiration was to become a UN translator. Several years later, she was working as a telemarketer, clearly underemployed. And I watched that segment with a great sense of sadness, because at a human level, I saw a dashed dream. But then at a professional level, since I was trained to be a conference interpreter, I knew that she was not prepared correctly to reach her potential. So the question that stayed with me was she coached correctly in undergrad so that she could do what it takes? And I would tell you, even for my students who are pursuing a master's degree in translation and interpretation, if they were to tell me that they would like to become UN translator or an UN interpreter, I tell them, you need to have a 10-year plan, right? And so that question stayed with me. Then fast forward, 2015, I decided to make a career change. I came back to my alma mater to become a career advisor. And all of a sudden, I had access to a lot of these young people who are students or who are applicants considering attending our school. And what I learned from my conversations with them is, one, language majors really during their undergrad years were not told about the opportunities that are out there for them in this huge industry. And I knew, because I came as an employer, I knew how hard it was to hire good people. So that was the first learning. And also, the Modern Language Association published a paper in 2007 that indicated that only 6% of language majors follow their professor's footsteps, getting into research or teaching. Then I wonder what happened to the other 94%. But there was no discussion. We don't know. Okay. And another thing that I also learned after I became a career advisor in higher ed is that enrollment in language studies has been decreasing at an alarming rate. And this is information published by the Modern Language Association. Between 2009 and 2015, enrollment rate dropped by 15%. Japanese and Korean increased a little bit. Spanish has dropped by 10%. So how is this making sense, right? We are living in an increasingly globalized world. For national security reasons, for business reasons, we need more language people, not fewer. So how is this making sense? One explanation that I have is since the 80s, government funding for higher ed has been decreasing. So the burden of funding for higher ed has been placed on the families. Okay, and so this graph shows the rate of increase in the cost of higher ed has been increasing at a higher rate than general cost of living and medical cost. So cost is going up. Okay, then another piece is this. We know wage stagnation is a problem in this country. And this information is based on the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Between 1989 and 2016, the median wages went up by 10%, but the cost of a four-year college degree went up by 98%. Right? So, and that explains why we're seeing the student debt as a major issue, right? Okay. Families do not have the ability to support students in their higher education. And with this picture in mind, then that explains why students have to think more and more about what do I need to do after graduation to pay back my student loan, right? And so this is a question that students tell me that they're asked, language majors, they're asked by their parents and family members of what are you going to do with that language degree? In fact, I have been invited to speak at universities, and the professors specifically tell me, Winnie, come talk about careers because our students need to answer this question. So that's what we're dealing with, right? And so it's with all those reasons, then within a year of me taking the job as a career advisor, I created this graphic to show my students, okay, these are the jobs that I have seen in the language industry. I've either done them or I know people who have done the job or doing the job, right? This ranges from being an individual contributor as a translator, as an interpreter, to individuals who support the recruiting, the management of those positions, to more technical positions in engineering, to more of the customer support type of positions. And I want to also stress, these are samples. This is not all inclusive. There are many other positions that are available out there. And quickly after I shared this with my student, I realized this is not enough because students tell me, I need to know more. You can't just tell me the title, right? So then I created a website, okay? And this is meant to be a resource for students. Hopefully we can reach them as young as possible in middle school. And also for our colleagues who may want to see the various options. So I would like to share with you how this works. Okay, so here's the website. And here is the ecosystem. I'm not going to go over my blog. So I'll show you the ecosystem. Okay, if you click on this graphic here, it will take you to the next page, where right now I have 53 different positions. And during the winter break, I have a number more to add to it. And so how this works is, let me just pick one job, Director of Localization. And so you'll see a typical job description. And the skills, typically what are the skills that are required, and the profile of people who have done the job or who are doing the job. For example, let me just pick on a Miss Alum. This is Teresa Marshall with Salesforce. And so what I would like to enable the viewers to do is, okay, so this is somebody, this is not a job, it's somebody imagined. This is a real job with a real person. So let's look at her career path. Where did she go to school? How did she prepare herself? And what was her career path? So this is how this website works, and I hope this can be a resource. Now, okay. So now, if we were to assume every language enthusiast has gotten the memo that there are many different jobs, right? And they all find a great place for themselves. But as I say to my students, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. Right? You need to think long term. So after you land your first position, what are the issues that you may need to think about? And so I will start by kind of sharing with you from the employer's perspective. At the Middlebury Institute, we have an internal, an intranet where we enable employers to post job ads. And my colleagues and I have analyzed thousands of job ads, trying to look at the hard skills and the soft skills that employers express that are desirable. And so I've summarized them. The first is energy and motivation. If you want a job, you have to really show you want the job, right? Critical thinking, and I cannot stress this enough. Employers have told me, Winnie, whatever you train your students, in 5 years, we need to retrain them anyway. So their critical thinking skills are the most important thing that we look for. Very nice, right? We work with teams, and it's especially important nowadays that so many of us work remotely. We don't have that face time. Your ability to work with people becomes even more important, not less important. Then, okay, integrity, it's important. You're able to grow, as I said, right? You have to relearn, you have to learn new skills. You have to unlearn skills and relearn skills. And you have to know how to work. So this is from the employer's perspective. And another interesting thing I've learned is this. This is my 5th year as a career advisor. So the students I advised in my earlier years now have a few years of work experience. And I'm now starting to get calls from them. They're talking about the career issues after a few years in the workplace or career transition issues. And so recently I surveyed a number of our recent graduates, and I asked them, what they look for in their professional work environment, okay? The number one most important thing is growth opportunities. It sort of makes sense. These are young professionals. They're looking for growth opportunities. And having a manager that will support their growth and give them autonomy. And in fact, in my business career, I've always remember what HR professionals tell me. People do not leave jobs. People leave their bosses, right? So having a good boss that will support your growth is extremely important. And then fair pay. And I chose the word fair very deliberately. I didn't choose great or best because HR professionals will tell you pay typically is not the top reason why people leave their jobs. It's probably the third or the fourth, okay? But it has to be fair, right? And then how you feel that you align with the company's culture. Actually, I was having coffee with two of our alumni, and Alex said something to Olga. Alex said, you have to like the product of your company. If you don't like it, you're not going to last, which is so true, okay? And then I asked our alumni, what are the things that you feel now that you've worked a little bit, what are the things that you feel that you could only learn in the workplace, that it's hard for the school to teach you? There are some things that just come from mileage, right? Okay. And the number one item is stakeholder management. Okay. How you manage your team, your peers, and your superiors. That's the thing that they feel they found the greatest amount of growth after they graduate. And these are the particular aspect that they talked about in terms of stakeholder management. So, and a word of advice for the students here, right? Even though our alumni said these are the things they felt that they could only learn after they started working, but start learning and thinking about these. The more you can learn before you graduate, the better off you are. And so I have an ask, okay? I didn't want to share this information with you and end it, okay? I think we can all play a role in shaping a better future for our industry. And I want to ask you, whether you're a student or whether you're a working professional already, if you can find opportunities to go talk to students in middle school, in high school, or in universities, and share with them the various opportunities in the language field, in translation and in localization, that would be great. You'll never know whether you're talking to the next CEO of a new company or a new innovation. And when you have new members coming into your team, if you can do it, find a way to mentor some new professionals. And since stakeholder management tends to be something that there's a steeper learning curve for newcomers, right? If you can find a way to structure your own insights into things that you can share with newcomers, that would be great. And another aspect is, since having a good manager is so important, if you are in a people management position, perhaps think about creating and implementing some kind of performance management training for your managers who manage people, okay? So those are my ask of you. I welcome your question later on. Thank you.
Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? My name is Elena Brandt. I am an assistant professor of professional practice at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, where I teach in the localization management program. And today I'm going to talk to you about research that myself and our research team have been doing in the core competencies for localization management. So this is research that I started because when I became a practicing project manager, I found that I was sort of thrown into the deep end of the pool and expected to sort of figure out very quickly on my own what were the skills associated with my job. And so when I became a professor over at the Middlebury Institute, I decided to start researching formally what are the skills associated with localization management, in part so that when I was teaching, I could be sure to impart the skills to my students that they needed to have when they took professional roles. And so, this is the team. This is the team that has been working on the core competencies of the localization manager. We have a couple people here today who have contributed to this research. Vanessa Prolau's in the front row, and Xiaofu Dong was at the table back there. So these are two people who are contributing research to this. This is not just my work, but also the work of Chang Qian, who started with the project with me in 2018, and she did a lot of work on the actual typology you'll see in a little bit. So I'll show you the typology of localization competencies that we've developed in just a few slides, but first I wanted to give some background for this research project. First of all, and this is something that I repeat over and over and over again, the localization industry is self-regulated, right? There's no governmental regulation over the skills and competencies needed to practice professionally in localization-related roles. Against that backdrop, we have ISO 17100, which is the standard on translation services and requirements for translation services that makes it exceedingly clear that industry regulation falls to LSPs. In fact, in their Section 3 resources, they state 6 times in about 600 words that for the roles like translators, revisers, reviewers, project managers, it's the TSP, the translation services provider, that is responsible for ensuring that the professionals that they are assigning work to have the competencies necessary to practice in that role. So for project management, you can see a quote here: the TSP shall ensure that project managers have the appropriate documented competencies. The challenge for employers and for candidates who are looking for jobs is what exactly are those competencies? So the purpose of our project is to, right now we are working on and building upon research as well that Adam Wooten did, identifying competencies based on job description research. So we're building upon that to go through, and at this point we're trying to identify, if we can, all of the competencies that are necessary for the professional practice of localization management. From there, what we would like to do is boil it down into core competencies. And in this way, we'd like to contribute to international standards of best practice. We'd like to continue improving localization training programs and provide guidance to professionals on the skills and competencies necessary to practice in localization roles. Essentially, what we're trying to do is decrease the learning curve. So if you think about a professional project manager, and for myself, I have about 5 years of professional project management experience. So in those 5 years without sort of explicit localization training, what were the skills that I gained from those 5 years of experience? And what I like to think about when I think about project managers is each time you're managing a project, it becomes a case study in your mind against which each time you run a new project, you are applying that previous knowledge that you gained to the new project. So can we decrease the learning curve? Can we say, okay, so we're going to throw somebody in the deep end of the pool and they're going to take 5 years to learn these specific skills. Rather than doing that, can we provide a foundation first so that, you know, somebody can kind of ease their way in? Maybe there's still a certain amount of swimming in the deep end that a project manager has to do, but if we can set project managers up for success and localization managers up for success, perhaps that will help improve things like employee retention and the success of projects within organizations. So our goal is, we essentially think of, within our typology, we look at localization management as something that includes a number of roles. So it could include the localization project management role, the localization engineering, quality management, account management roles. We see all of these as sort of the baseline roles that are very sort of interconnected as well. So if you're a project manager planning a project, the checks that you incorporate into your process are actually quality control. So as a project manager, you're a quality manager as well. As a quality manager, each time you resolve a query, you're carrying out project management. So the roles aren't mutually exclusive, but what we would like to do is essentially identify what are the competencies necessary for those bottom roles so that we can prepare people to take the roles of the future, right? As automation increases, we keep hearing that the next story that sort of is circulating among the industry is that the project manager is going to be automated away. And what I always say is, please automate the boring tasks. I didn't get my education to write POs. If you can make that automatic, please do, because I'd like to focus on global strategy. I'd like to focus on program management, all of these things that are much more interesting and are it's a much more effective use of my skills too in my training. That's just with the hourglass metaphor again. We want to fill professional project managers with the skills associated with the bottom half of the hourglass so we can open them up to take the positions at the top end. So our methodology, we started in the spring of 2018 by building a corpus of around 70 job descriptions. From there, in the fall of 2018, we analyzed those job descriptions and we ended up with a list of around 1,000 skills. From there, we went on to organize the 1,000 skills into the typology that I'll show you in just a little bit. In the spring of 2019, based on a preliminary typology that we had, we started building a survey. Simply because since we were basing our research on job descriptions, we wanted to check any sort of bias on the employer side that might be present in our results by passing our research by industry practitioners as well. And then in the fall of 2019 of this year, we presented a survey, sort of a larger pilot survey to the industry or to select industry professionals. So this is version 3 of our typology, and this typology will certainly change. You'll see ongoing development with this. We are organizing our typology according to the same organization of the MQM translation errors typology. If anyone is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And so you can see here, these are sort of the dimensions of our typology, and then nested underneath each one of those dimensions are the actual competencies and skills that are associated with the roles. And so this is the actual typology in full, and this always kind of overwhelms people, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. This is also publicly available. I'll give you the link to this later on, but you can see that nested under each one of these dimensions are the specific skills associated with the associated competencies. So if I can just show you around one of the branches of this typology, this is the management competency, in which you can see that we have all sorts of sub-competencies, such as risk management, the ability to fill out a specification form, to fill out style guides, terminology management, stakeholder management, vendor management, that's self-management, right? Not only do we need to be able to motivate ourselves, we need to be able to motivate others. Quality management, data management, localization engineering, the list goes on and on. I'll let you dig into this on your own time. This is, again, I'll give a link for this. This is publicly available. Let's see, where was I? Oh. So on to the survey. So we based our survey on that typology that you see, a version of that typology that you see. And again, what we wanted to do with our survey was to check our results against the industry. And so we asked probably 20 to 30 questions in our survey. We sent that survey out through convenience sampling. So we sent it to people that we knew and then asked those people to please share the survey with others. Thank you very much to IMUG. I know it was a couple Thursdays ago that you shared our survey. We certainly appreciate that. We ended up getting 62 respondents to our survey, and you can see here where those survey respondents came from. So most respondents came from the United States. We also had a pretty good showing of responses from Asia, probably China, And then we had responses from Western Europe and Eastern Europe as well. I'd like to note that the results of our survey are not conclusive, simply because within the US market, for example, if we assume something like 200,000 practitioners within the US within the field of localization, which is not an exact number at all. US Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers cite around 75,000 professional translators and interpreters in 2018, I believe. So at about 200,000 practitioners within the US, we would have needed around 400 respondents in order for our results to be conclusive. That is not to say that we didn't find some interesting trends from the 62 responses that we did receive. Thank you to everyone who took this survey as well. Our plan was that the survey would take around 15 minutes, and on average, we found that respondents spent around 15 to 20 minutes on the survey. You can see that around 65% of our respondents had over 5 years of experience. Around 40% of our respondents had around over 5 years of experience. And so the experience level of the respondents, I think, is a good sign of just the results, though we would like to encourage newcomers to participate in future surveys that we have, because that fresh perspective is something that's definitely needed when we try to establish competencies. So for this question, we asked respondents that list of around 20 competencies associated with the dimension of management, we asked survey respondents to simply click and pick which ones were necessary. And respondents, probably by no surprise, thought that project management was the most necessary. What was surprising to me was that terminology management ranked so lowly. Simply because according to best practices, the specification form and terminology management are two things that you need to have consistently on your projects in order to deliver a quality product. And so you think about something like the specification form. This is an image of the specification form that I teach at MIS. It's a 9-page specification form in which project managers are carrying out risk management by capturing very, very important data that they need on the project in order to make sure that the project progresses successfully. Among the data, or among the parameters of work that the project manager is defining, is whether overt or covert translation will be used. So overt translation would be a translation that does not hide the fact that it's a translation. Covert translation would be a translation that is more like transcreation. And so that's something that's very, very important to establish before you start a project, lest you deliver a project to your client that doesn't at all meet their needs. I also wanted to say something about terminology management, because it really, really surprises me that terminology management ranked so low on our list. And I think that points to the fact that there needs to be more stakeholder education in the importance of terminology management. So you can see here the semantic triangle, where you have the object that exists in space in the left-hand corner, you have the concept as it is imagined in a person's mind at the top, and then the designation or the actual term that a person will use to refer to a concept. And so when I think about terminology management as perception design, when people are saying that or thinking that terminology management isn't important, it surprises me from a practical perspective, because you think about a project that you're translating into 10 languages, 5 translators per language. If you don't define the terminology on the front end, you can expect to do a lot of rework on the back end. At the same time, every term that you see elicits, it elicits sort of or activates a concept systems in the recipient's mind. And so in translation, we want to be very careful that we're activating a positive concept system if we want a product or content to be received well. So terminology management is incredibly important. I'm not going to talk too much about technological competencies, because Adam Wooten's going to cover that. I do want to talk about machine translation ranking so high in this list, and about perception design when it comes to machine translation, because I think MT is something that's being pretty poorly received by translators within our industry. though when you look at the standards, you actually need more competencies according to ISO standards to carry out PEMT than you do to carry out traditional human translation. So it just seems odd to me that MT is being sort of undervalued both by the industry and the rates that it will pay for PEMT and by translators who are sort of in fear of this inferior type of translation. A final sort of note, we asked respondents as well if they believe that bilingualism is necessary for the professional practice of localization management. Around 56% of our respondents agreed that bilingualism was necessary. And then moving forward, so how can the typology be used? We believe the typology can be used by employers who can, with this explicit list, they can take a look at their talent in-house, identify the skills of that talent, and then when recruiting new members, they can build out their competencies that they have covered in their workforce by understanding the competencies that they have and the competencies that they need. For job candidates, you can take a look at this typology and figure out what are the skills I have versus the skills that I should be concentrating on training in. And then for trainers, where can we add nuance to our programs and what is the core of our program? So you can see more about our study at sites.mis.edu/LMCC. Follow us on Twitter at LMCC_research, and you can follow us on Facebook as well. Thank you.
So I'm thrilled that Elena has taken something that interested me and taken it much further than I ever would have taken it, to the point of approaching what could be a great standard for the industry. And but being a former student who was very interested in what I needed to do to succeed in the localization industry, and now as a professor, as an employer, I'm frequently asked, what do I need to do to succeed in the industry? And I offer my opinion, but when I just offer my opinion without backing that up somehow, I'm frequently challenged by my students. So I often have to do this research because I'm sharing my opinion in a lot of anecdotes, and I love it and I think that I'm right. But I'm challenged so much by my brilliant students that I have to go out and do some kind of research to back this up. So that's what started a passion of mine to do this. One of the questions that I'm frequently asked, because I teach a lot of courses on translation technology, is this: do I really need to learn Trados? I'm frequently challenged on that. I get a lot of pushback. People say, well, isn't it complicated? Isn't it expensive? Isn't it supporting the man? Something like that. And there are arguments back and forth, arguments in favor of it, saying, yes, well, it's the industry standard. Or others say, yeah, you have to learn it because it's a necessary evil. And there are others that want to throw it out. So a couple of years ago, I did some research into this, looking in to see, okay, what are employers really asking for? And then I repeated that research just this year to see if there were any changes. This year, I looked at 264 job postings in localization, almost half of them related to localization management, more than a third related to translation, linguist roles, and then a small percentage related to localization engineering roles. And looked specifically at those job postings that required some kind of translation technology skills. I found only 8% specifically required knowledge of Trados. So some might say, well, hey, if 8% require it, if you want to be eligible for 8% of the jobs, not ruled out automatically, yes, you need to learn Trados. Others will say, well, that's still 92% that you'd be qualified for without knowing Trados, so forget it. So that doesn't really answer our question yet. But I will note that is down significantly from the last time I did this. When I analyzed more than 200 jobs in 2017, almost a quarter listed Trados specifically as a minimum requirement. But here are the top 10 technologies that were specifically mentioned by name in job postings. Far in the lead was Trados. followed by, and I included not only translation memory or translation environment tools, but also translation management systems in there that have translation environments built in. And SDL World Server followed that. MemoQ had a very strong showing. I did not include jobs specifically from the tool developers that were saying, yes, we would like you, for example, if TransPerfect posted a job saying, yes, we would like you to know and use Global Link, I didn't include that. If SmartLink posted a job saying, yes, we'd like you to know and use SmartLink, I didn't include that. So this was only jobs that were posted by other companies saying, yes, we want you to learn this tool that's developed by a third-party provider. And yeah, and so of the job posting, 60% said, yeah, we want you to know translation technologies. We don't care what tool. Or they didn't mention a tool specifically by name. 40% specifically mentioned at least one tool by name. And there were some changes from the first time this was done. There was a significant decrease in the number of job postings, the percentage of job postings that specifically mentioned Trados or World Server. Percentage was cut by more than half for Trados. And then there was an increase in the number of job postings that for a lot of these web-based tools, MemoQ, XTM, MemSource, and Plunet in particular. Yeah. Even though there were fewer job postings that were naming a specific software. There wasn't much change in the number of jobs, management-related jobs that requested Trados specifically, or engineering jobs. But take a look here at the bottom. In 2017, 66% of the translation job postings on Indeed and LinkedIn that mentioned a tool, that mentioned they wanted you to know a tool, specifically mentioned Trados, whereas now only 16% are specifically saying Trados, which is quite a change. So yeah, so there has been a drop, but Trados is still requested by far more than any other tool out there, by name at least. Why is that? Why is Trados requested most frequently? Are there reasons beyond the fact that it does have the largest market share? From talking with professionals who are hiring translators, project managers, engineers, and others, some of that mention of Trados could account for the what I call the Kleenex factor, because some people will, just like you'll refer to tissues as Kleenex, which is really a brand name, even though it might not be Kleenex brand. There are definitely those who are posting jobs and say, yeah, we need you to know Trados, when what they really mean is we need you to know some kind of translation technology. So some of it may account for that. But then also, we've seen a large increase in the number of companies that are using some very simple, easy-to-use tools, like SmartCat and MateCat. But you don't see many people actually posting job descriptions saying, hey, we need somebody who knows how to use SmartCat or MateCat. Why wouldn't they post that? Because you can learn those tools in 2 minutes. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to include that in the list of job requirements. Whereas, because Trados is more complex, requires a little bit more time to learn, if you need somebody who knows to know Trados or to use Trados, you should mention it. And if you need to know any tool, if you know that they know Trados, they can easily figure out MemoQ or just about any other tool that you might put in front of them, because Trados is relatively complex compared to others. Right? So I've seen it both ways. I've seen where schools, including MIS and other universities, will teach Trados, and I've seen what happens when schools don't teach it. And because it is the market leader, because of these other factors that I've described, there are certain advantages to teaching students Trados, or when students learn Trados. And some of that is not completely logical. It's not completely rational. Some of the reasons why that can be a benefit are purely emotional. That students tend to have more confidence going into job interviews when they say, yeah, I know how to use the market leader. They might very well be able to learn any tool without necessarily knowing Trados, but they have this extra confidence when they do already know this particular tool. All right. So what I frequently tell students when they ask, do I really need to learn Trados, is, and not just my students, but any professionals who are asking me, do I really need to learn Trados? I'll tell them, yeah. If you can afford Trados, great, give it priority, but not to the exclusion of all others. Make sure you learn some other tools. If you can't afford it, learn another tool really, really well. Learn MemoQ really, really well, or learn something else really, really well. Once you know that other tool really well, you could take a 30-day trial of Trados and figure it out on your own as well. But that's one way to be particularly successful with that. Now, we've spoken today about some ideas of, okay, exploring different career paths, learning what's really needed to be successful in a particular career path in case of localization management. And this seems so practical and seems so natural to many of us, but some of us were once language students who didn't really see the practical and didn't see the connections or didn't have those mentors and helps who could guide us to those practical careers. Because if you were, how many of you did study language in undergraduate? Almost the entire room, okay. And most of us, I imagine, when we were studying that language, we saw options to maybe speak it if we lived in the country or maybe teach the language and not much more. And we see that this is a problem around the world. I want you to think about where you earned whatever undergraduate degree you earned, and think about perhaps, is there an opportunity for your alma mater to benefit from a new program? We know educators around the world are aware that there is a need for language. They don't know how to use those language skills necessarily in very practical means in the language services industry, but they see that, okay, there are more jobs being posted that need bilingual skills, but they're seeing that there's still a disconnect between their programs and what the world really wants. And employers are seeing that too. Employers who have been surveyed say, yeah, we think that bilingual skills, intercultural skills are very important, but students aren't being prepared well enough to actually use those skills the way that would be beneficial to us. We see also that's not just business students, but even technology graduates must learn how to apply bilingual skills in a more practical way. And as Winnie mentioned, language programs across the US are hurting. They are suffering. In recent years, there's been a significant drop in language enrollment, significant drop in the number of language degrees awarded, and entire language programs, hundreds of language programs across the US have been cut entirely as a result. But of course, there's one area, one language-related program that is not in such decline. Obviously, you know that most people here are even attending MIS right now. We know that the Translation and Localization Management program is growing significantly, but we're not the only place where it's growing, and I would love to see many more, particularly undergrad. I don't think that many graduate programs could imitate us, but I would love to see, I don't think that any could, but I would love to see many undergraduate programs pop up to prepare students even better for advanced entry programs, or even just a solid 2 years at MIS. And there are examples of that have recently happened. Just a few years ago, Brigham Young University launched a minor in localization. University of Texas at Arlington, and we have a graduate of the of that program here. The University of Texas at Arlington has long offered a certificate in localization, and just last year they started offering a minor in localization, and that grew significantly because language students are hungry for something practical. And then I helped to design that minor at BYU, and then I also helped to design an associate's degree in a minor in localization that just launched this fall at Weber State University. And I've been extending this invitation to students and professionals everywhere. Think, would your alma mater benefit from a new localization program? If so, I would love to share what I've learned. I'd love to talk with you about it. Maybe you could be a professional who could approach some of your old professors, some of the deans of where you used to be, and say, hey, you know what? Maybe the language department is having some trouble here with enrollment or decreased number of degrees awarded. This is an opportunity to resurrect the foreign language department or some department related to where the language degrees are housed. And this could be an opportunity for you to not just change the life of one or two students who you might meet or mentor at your alma mater, but change the life perhaps of many dozens by helping to create some kind of program at your alma mater so that all over the country, students could be clamoring to find out information that's been presented by Elena and Winnie and others so that they can actually have a possibility, even realize that there is the possibility to use their language skills in a much more practical way. So that is my invitation to you to consider that. And if you'd like to talk, I'd be happy to talk with you. But that is our presentation. Thank you so much for your time. Do you have any questions for any of the three of us?
Hi, my name is Anne. I'm a student at Middlebury Institute. I'm sorry. First of all, I just have a very small comment for all three speakers for mentioning the unpreparedness of language students for careers. Actually, I think like in many general universities and comprehensive universities, sometimes the school just wouldn't devote enough resources to its language majors. When I was in undergrad, like 10 out of 10 in like internship or networking or career opportunities would be investment banks and law firms and consulting firms. The school just doesn't care that much about the 150 language majors that were at the school. So that's why I came to Miss.
Yeah.
And I have a small.
And no other school has somebody like Winnie dedicated.
So thank you very much for being with us. And I have a question for Lina actually, because yesterday we just listened to a presentation by Mr. Ito Aki, and his point was the most important skill for students to have is sales skills. You need to like present yourself as a product and then make sure employers want to buy you. And like that didn't appear as a key point in your research or in the graph. So what do you think about this?
I would actually refer you to Winnie, and I think back to my first semester at Miss. Winnie very kindly sat down for lunch with me and talked to me about sort of what employers are seeking, and she told this metaphor that I love so much, and I wish I would have written it down at the time, about a triangle of mentality of localization professionals, where the bottom part of the triangle are the technical skills that you would have that are sort of just expected, right? Nobody congratulates you for having the technical skills that you need to have to practice in a role. And then in the middle of the triangle was the ability to communicate, to influence stakeholders. And then at the very top was the ability to execute. And I think that's something that, soft skills are so hard to capture within a typology. And so, but I would definitely, that ability to engage with stakeholders and execute, I think are really, really important skills.
Yeah, I would just echo that. That's an excellent point. I've definitely seen employers looking at Miss students and other students and see that, oh, you know what, there might be some really, really sharp students applying for a particular job, that the CEO happens to be commenting to me about. Some of those students were able to present themselves well and sell themselves, and others weren't. And so the opportunity just wasn't open to them at all, just because they couldn't get through the door there.
So I think when I think about how to run an organization, be it public or private, right, there are three key components: people, process, technology, right? But process and technology will not happen on its own. It's not magic, right? So what would enable process and technology to thrive? It's people, right? And when Aki talked about selling yourself, it's not about going in front of people to say, see how great I am, right? It's about articulating your thoughts, right? And so if you think about it in the job hunting scenario, it's about articulating the value you can bring to the organization. And then after you start working, it's about being able to articulate the organization's goal and mobilize people to go with you and then get things done. So I think that's how I interpret what he said about selling. It's about the ability to communicate.
All right. Thank you. One issue that I've seen throughout this process, through the various presentations, is that people talk about management, and management is a key tool for getting things done. But management is often a limitation on creativity. So we really need to think more about using tools to be more creative and find new solutions. Right, and the management piece sometimes can hinder progress, right? And in particular, what in your closing remarks about what the world needs, we need the world to work together creatively for the sake of the whole planet, not to be narrowly focused on your own specialty. Although, you know, specialties help us be more precise, but sometimes they can be limiting. So we want to kind of combine those two, right? And one of the things that Jeanette and I have been working on with students, young students, right, is helping them to understand management versus leadership, right? And sometimes management restricts people from learning new things, whereas leadership is about inspiring people to create new solutions. Of course, you have to learn what solutions have been discovered in the past, but then be creative and encourage all of the people you're working with to be creative and to help develop new solutions. Right. So that's just a perspective that hit me as I was listening to a lot of the presentations. Thank you.
Very good. Any other?
You don't get to go home until I ask a question, so that's.
Thank you, Merrill.
I'll put this in the form of a question, but it's really more of a recommendation because I suspect that the answer to the question is going to be not very much. So here's the question. When you look at localization and you look at it's all part of the language and communication, and it's part of a much bigger set of processes and products that are delivered. I've been working a lot recently on the quality side. In fact, I'm working on the new MQM standard that's coming out. And when you look at the issue of quality, localization is at the end of the process. And a lot of the problems start much higher. And a good rule of thumb is always push quality upstream. You always want to catch things and do them right from the very beginning. So what is upstream of localization? I can see two large areas. One of them is in software engineering, and that's called internationalization. And there's a lot of things that localization people have to fix because somebody didn't know how to internationalize correctly. And then the other one is in writing, so technical writing in particular, but all kinds of writing, and writing the right way so that things can be localized or translated well. So I'll do the question, and then, based on your answers, it's really a recommendation that if you want to go on from localization and get real penetration, go knock on the door of the language departments and the computer programming departments and see that they get their piece and that you're talking and they understand your requirements. So my question is, what are you doing today to be more effective in reaching out to people beyond the localization community?
Okay, that took a turn. So, just to start to answer that question, first of all, at MIS we are adding additional courses on internationalization, and so that and there's much more being taught about that, even just in the translation technology class that I teach. In first semester, students are already being introduced to best practices in internationalization, and in a couple weeks, a little bit about global authoring as well, because that is important. You can't make the best use of the technology if you're only fixing things that are already broken and not making sure that things are done right from the beginning, and that applies to many classes as well. But I would agree that there definitely needs to be more done with reaching out to others, and although it has not happened as much as I would like, when I have personally been advising undergraduate programs about adding a localization degree or a minor or another program, some of the most exciting things have happened, some of the best opportunities have happened when administrators in humanities and foreign languages have been able to connect meaningfully with other departments in computer science and business as well. And I've heard plenty of arguments that maybe we should eventually get to the point where there are no localization degrees, because localization permeates every other degree at the university. That would be ideal. We're a long way off, but I definitely I agree with your urge to reach out and work much more on making sure that things are done right from the beginning, that things are created global ready from the beginning. Do you have anything to add to that?
I would say that I know the ATA as well. I'm on the board of the directors of the ATA, and school outreach is something that we're looking at doing as well. Both Winnie and Adam called for school outreach, going to schools and talking to individuals about what is localization. So I think right now we're building a couple of presentations for, the ATA has presentations on what is translation and what is interpreting, but they don't have any presentations ready-made for people to go into schools, to primary schools, secondary schools, and teach people what is localization. And so I think it's definitely, you have to get people when they're in primary school aware of what localization is, so they see that path forward for themselves and they don't quit learning language too. It's really unfortunate, I think, in this country that you have individuals who spend a long time learning languages, maybe in high school, and then they get to college and they waive their language requirements. It's like those are the people you want to continue taking language classes. So I think just, education and outreach.
So when I started attending events like IMUG and Women Localization 4 years ago, after spending 25 years in the language industry, one word that I heard that kind of jarred me in the beginning, I kept hearing the professionals in localization talk about evangelization. And that's a pretty strong word, right? And that was not part of my vocabulary in my business career. But after getting to know the professionals in the localization world a bit more and understanding kind of what they're dealing with, especially on the client side, right? I get to kind of appreciate why they use that word. But then I think back on my own career, going back to the selling, okay? No matter what you do, right? You're always trying to frame the issues, right? And influence how others can work with you to reach a bigger goal, right? So I think the training we give to our students in terms of a thorough understanding of the steps and the processes, so that they know the best practices, right? And also in our project management classes and a variety of, we have practicum, right? Although we don't use that word evangelization every day, we're training them on how to do that. Because personally, I think that is a very important differentiating factor that will differentiate a good performer from a great performer with, progressive career movement. So I think that's how I see we're addressing it.
Thank you. You just reminded me of another exciting thing. You talk about evangelization, right? And what is evangelization? In order to be a good evangelist, you have to understand what the other side wants or thinks they want and what they understand. If you don't understand that, you can't evangelize, right? So evangelization is not only knowing your own field and your own subject matter, but knowing the other person's as well, so that you can make that connection, and then everybody wins, right? Thank you.
I know that IMUG in the past has had plenty of presentations by others, like Anna Schlegel and other leaders in the industry in Silicon Valley who have done a very good job of understanding what their businesses need, evangelizing and making sure that then localization is a very important strategic part early on of what is going to be happening at their company. Any other questions?
Yeah, hi. So thanks so much for your talks today. What I wanted to ask is, you brought up the thing about intercultural competencies. I was just curious what you believe intercultural competencies are, and if you could just, talk about it real quick for us.
For me, I like to use the metaphor of the chameleon for intercultural competence. I think intercultural competence, you think about translators and professional communicators as people who are able to gear their communication to the audience that they are speaking to. And so for translators, you're sort of walking through the world as a chameleon and changing your communication, changing sort of just how you're approaching your audience depending on who that audience is. And so utmost respect to anyone who is a translator and interpreter who can do that not just in one language, but in two languages.
Sounded good to me.
Well, it's almost 8:30. Normally that means it's time for Merle to ask the last question, but
But I already did.
yeah, I know. So is this sort of a time warp? Tex.
There we go.
We didn't hear
Text
from
will punctuate it.
Just so we can get to the deli on the other side, I'll ask a question. And actually, I'll make a couple of comments. I think one of the things that changed in the industry with respect to Trados, can we get rid of the echo?
No. Hold it away.
One of the things that changed with respect to Trados is the standardization of the API, things like XLith, so that whereas 10 years ago, a company would have to worked with Trados couldn't integrate with other tools. But these days you can have multiple tools and you can leave it up to the translator to use a tool and feel comfortable that it will integrate with the systems and processes that companies have. So I think that affects the reasons why people would demand Trados.
It certainly helps to kind of level the playing field, right?
Absolutely.
And hopefully we'll see more of that with more standardization, including TAPIC.
Yeah. The other comment would be about we all love localization and languages here, but I know from my experience talking to businesses that skill is not valued. It's commoditized. People are easily replaced, and salaries and the rates people are paid is very low. So I know when I go to
a VP and I talk to them about having quality language, they say, I don't care. You know, I can translate over and over. It's still cheaper than one of my engineers. You know, I'm paying somebody $150 an hour for coding. I don't, as long as we're not interfering with them. So I think in terms of, as you were talking about evangelization and getting businesses to demand localization courses, we need to explain and evangelize to the industry where their costs are and the benefits of localization in terms of revenue and costs. And if you want to make that case and get schools to support your efforts, then I think that's an important thing to, an important point to make to the industry.
Absolutely. You know, we talk a lot about making sure that we can communicate in the language of others. Sometimes that's not actually a separate foreign language. It's a language of relevance, like language of business and costs. Absolutely. And what's actually important to them. So excellent point.
Yeah, and the question I have perhaps for Alana, in an industry that's fast changing in terms of technology, I can look at the breakout that you displayed, but it's a little bit backwards looking because it's what people are doing today or have been for the past few years. What's the track record for using that kind of approach in terms of industries that are fast changing and projecting skills that people need 4 years out, 10 years out? Because I think that's really what's key. So if we focus on, if we tell people to focus on certain skills, but because the way industry is changing, those skills aren't needed, we're doing a disservice to those people in the industry.
I would say with automation is kind of the big key word that we're hearing these days. And I think too, unfortunately, our industry is sort of defined sometimes by catching up to decisions being made by others. I think MT is a good example of that, where it was formed without really anyone from the linguistic side at the table. And I think there are some results of MT that maybe if they had somebody who had a focus on language sitting at the table, they could have avoided, such as just reproducing bias and the results of MT. I think we kind of unfortunately forget with something like MT that it's human language that we're putting in there. And so we can only expect that whatever human language we're putting in there, the biases of what we're putting in is going to come back out. And so I think when it comes to a typology of skills, what we need to think about is, again, I mean, you're always going to have to know certain technical skills. You're going to have to retrain in technical skills, but there are certain competencies that are never going to change, like the ability to communicate and influence others. You're never going to be able to get anything done if you can't wield influence over the people that you're working with. For localization management in particular, because often project managers don't have formal supervisory authority over the people that they're working with. So it really is a question of convincing people to do the things that you'd like them to do. I think we just have to keep developing the typology too and make sure that we're responding to the needs of the industry.
I'm sorry. No, I'm just getting inspired by new things that come up. And I remember when I was a major in Chinese and I was thinking about, okay, maybe I'll go work for the United Nations. And then I talked to people about, well, what is the skill you need to be a translator at the United Nations? And basically the answer was, don't think. Let the translation go through your brain and come out your mouth, right? Because you don't have time to think, right? But then where's the creativity, right? And you get locked into the old translation or the old concept. Instead of helping people, what the United Nations is supposed to do is help people to learn how to work together and understand each other in a changing world, right? And if you can't think, but just rotate and machine translation through your own brain, that's not going to do it, right? So and thank you for talking about the creativity part of it. Right?
Thank you.